All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Glad you're all here. My name is Matthew Hurley. I'm the Government Affairs and Policy Analyst for Community Action Partnership of Orange County. I've been in this position 2 years. This is my third, and prior to that, I've done work with the state legislature for 7 years, both as a personal staffer and a committee staffer. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation if you need clarification on everything. Um, my goal with this presentation isn't so much to do a I'm only a Bill Schoolhouse Rock thing, but I wanted to emphasize demystifying the process, specifically because I think there's a lot that gets made of, what's the secret, what's the magic bullet, solution to moving legislative asks through this California state legislature. Um, and obviously, I'm sure we're all aware there's a lot of bureaucracy involved, but applying pressure and knowing the schedule are two things that are fairly easy to do that will help any advocacy effort throughout the state of California, no matter what your organization is and what your goals are. But I think we can all work together on that. And I'm happy to answer any questions both during the presentation or you can consider me a resource going forward. I say as the slide doesn't transition. There we are. So, a little bit of background information. I don't know if everyone is coming into this with, as a layperson to advocacy and policymaking. But something I like to emphasize is that California has a full-time legislature. Uh, that's not true of every state. It's something that I think is always important to emphasize, not only to advocates, but to the legislature themselves sometimes when they need to be reminded that uh, you can call upon them anytime. They are civil servants in the way that they need to be responsive to the people, to our asks, and it's an important framing for how to approach everything. I don't want to spend too long on this slide because I'm hopeful that people are familiar with the background on California legislature. I, I guess actually I could ask what is everyone's experience? I apologize, I could have opened with that, but I don't know how interactive this presentation needs to be. Does anybody want to start? I'd love to get introductions, actually. I know we're already started, but
I'll start, Matthew. Hi, I'm Linda Timbers with Project Go, and I'm over here in beautiful Placer County, right near Sacramento. And I have some familiarity, but I didn't realize that there were only 10 states, and I didn't realize there was a limitation on bills. So, I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, I'm embarrassed to say, but didn't know that. So you're already starting out of the chute. Thank you.
Placer County is my backyard. I went to Granite Bay High.
Oh, all right. Good school.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. I'm James Scott. I'm a field rep with CSD. Very interested in the process. I was in the legal field for a dozen years before coming to work in state service, and then I've just done advocacy work in my personal life on a number of bills as well. So always interested to learn more.
Great. I very nearly went into the legal profession myself. I was convinced that I needed a law degree as an undergrad to do what I do now. I had a very good professor who said, Matt, why do you want to go to law school if what you want to do is policy work? And I'm very grateful to them that they started me into that track. Although a legal understanding, I'm sure, is very helpful. I'm sometimes out of my depth and having to rely on not only counsel but folks who have a legal sciences background. See, Imelda and Eric, some limited experience. Uh, Daniel?
Hi, Daniel McIntyre. I'm the CEO for North Coast Opportunities. I have limited experience and mostly that's from the housing advocacy side because I spent 10 years in affordable housing development. So I was worked on housing policy mostly part of this.
And then Jillian?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jillian. I'm the projects coordinator at Cal Kappa. Also somewhat limited, trying to learn more. I studied political science in college, so kind of a little bit of a policy background, but really interested to learn more, especially about the state legislature.
And then I know David because we've met before and gone through this before. Sarah?
Sarah Wright, administrative coordinator at Cal Kappa. And honestly, outside of like just the very basics that you learn in high school, most of what I know is from, the past 2 years on our education and legislative committee. I feel like it was like trial by fire. It's like suddenly we're talking about all these like bills and things, and I'm like just researching terms and like who are these people they're talking about. So I'm really excited to actually have a little more formalized introduction.
Great. And Eric? Oh, no, wait. Jordan, I'm sorry. We think we were introduced briefly, but
Yeah, sorry. Jordan Cox with Cal Kappa. Kind of like a few other people, pretty limited experience. All my understanding has kind of come from David Knight, who talks a lot about like the political side of things. And then like Sarah, just learning through our different committees. So a little bit limited knowledge.
great. Um, Lawrence, I'm not sure you need an introduction.
Well, I'm Lawrence Einer. I'm the Director of Training Technical Assistance here at Cal Kappa. I've seen versions of this presentation from a couple of folks. Every time I see one, I learn something new, and I'm very happy for that because we're exploring getting into some coalition work, and they're pulling together legislation, like draft legislation. So I'd love to know a little bit more about that process and how it goes through, since I'll be potentially participating in it. So appreciate your messaging today.
Absolutely. And I'll see what I can do to emphasize the drafting process. When I was a personal staffer, was in charge of introducing some bills and going through that myself. Things have changed, but not the baseline. I think that's important to note too, is that a lot of the work changes not necessarily year to year, but with the new speaker, I'm sure everyone has understood that, they're trying to find a new normal for how things are being run out of the speaker's office. Um, but yes, to emphasize, California legislature is one of the most productive. Linda, you noted here, there's a limit on the number of bills which assembly members and senators can introduce. In fact, as of this year, that number is changing. It's unclear what it'll be by the end of the session, but they are trying to reduce the bill load. Um, Something I don't always talk about on this slide specifically, but California has a relatively small legislature for the size of the state that we are. Um, if you were compare us to, say, a national legislative body like, let's say, Germany, one of California's top economic competitors. Always a great thing to emphasize. California is the fifth largest economy in the world. That's something I run into a lot as an advocate when people talk about, especially more conservative offices and folks who, want to try and navigate the legislative process from a more centrist mindset. They'll talk about economic concerns, business leaving California, and um, always good to be able to push back on that in a way which is constructive, which is to emphasize that California is the fifth largest economy in the world. Business is not hurting in California. We are a very pro-business state. And one of the best resources for that comes from the California State Legislature itself, the California Economic and Development Committee, which publishes monthly fast facts about just how great the economy is doing. And they compare us to the UK, to Japan, to Germany, to China and India. And it's one of the ways you can be more subversive in discussing California's position in the country, reminding them that we're not competing with Texas or Florida for businesses, jobs, generating capital, workforce development. We are competing with the top economic powers in the world. But if you compare the size of our legislature, California only has a little over 150 people. It's not in a position to grow anytime soon. The German parliament is 770 legislatures. You can imagine how much more they're able to accomplish. And that's just, I like to provide that as a little bit of background and framing in terms of how we approach this, knowing that there are multiple demands on members of the Assembly and the Senate, and exactly how much they are trying to manage at once when they are working on various committees and subcommittees and bill packages overall. So if you consider that the California legislature is trying to do the work of a major, economic power with a fifth the size of the of a legislative body, things start to make a little more sense in terms of being pulled in different directions. Or at least I feel they do. So, best public resources available to people who are interested in anything that might be happening at the legislature: the Assembly Daily File, California Legislative Information System, and Televising the Assembly. I'll be forwarding, this is probably the slide that gets the most clicks when I send it to people. These links will take you to, in theory, or practically, actually, everything you could ever want to know about the state legislature. Leginfo specifically allows you to look up any bill at any time that's been introduced, publicly noticed. It allows you to access the bill history, any amendments that have been made to the bill. It allows you to create a list of the bills you want to be tracking as they move through the legislature and get email updates when they are voted on, when they are noticed for a public hearing, when they are amended, even when they receive support and opposition from any given group or individual or agency like ours. Highly recommend using LIS. It is in fact a forward-facing version of what the assembly persons themselves and their staffers use. They get a little more back-end access, slightly more robust, but they're using this same tool when they track legislation through the process. And I think that helps people to understand sorry about that. I hope that helps people to understand, and this is not a mystical, behind smoke. There's not a lot of smoke and mirrors here that actually take place, or we talk about the cigar smoke filled room. Deal making happens, but all of it has to take place around the public mandates for notice, for hearings, and for votes to be taken publicly. Now, the Legislative Daily File is where you will find all of that. It is actually a published written thing that you can access. You can get a PDF version of it every day if you want. Even I don't use it every day. But the wonderful thing about the Daily File is it has all of the noticed business for the Assembly and the Senate. There are separate files, one for each house. It also contains the calendar, the dates for any noticed hearings and floor sessions, and it has all of the various committees of the Assembly and the Senate, and it has the dates for which any of those hearings can publicly notice a hearing. When I say publicly notice, I mean that there are rules in the California State Legislature. Before they can have a hearing, there has to be sufficient public notice given. The rules for each committee are different, but it means that they're not allowed to sneak things through, or that's the intention. It can be hard. Turnaround is, fast. I'm not able to attend every hearing on every bill or every subject I would like to, just because, getting a plane or a train ticket up to Sacramento on 3 to 5 days notice isn't easy. But that's why having representation in Sacramento and you know, and having resources there matter a lot. So with the daily file and with and part of that public notice I should mention now is all uh, all floor sessions and hearings have to be publicly televised. There is a local access channel, and there is online access. That's the way it has to be done, according to the rules of the legislature now. I don't see that changing anytime soon because they love the online access. It's all managed for in-house by the Assembly communications team. And I see our executive assistant for Mr. Scott has jumped into the call. I'm going to continue though. That link will take you to everything that's being televised that day online, streamed online, and you can access it to watch votes happen. This is what I use especially when, and I'll get to I'll note it again when we get to that slide, when the appropriations hearing happens for all bills that have been flagged with a sufficient public cost. And then finally, you have the legislative calendar and legislative council. So I talked about the calendar briefly in regards to the daily file and the Senate file. You can access an online version of it, download a PDF, or just look at it online. That's actually how I schedule my year in advance. You can access all of the deadlines. It's published by the Rules Committee, which is the committee that manages all the other processes and is actually the employer for the rest of the state legislature. And the useful thing about the calendar is that if you track back through it based on the deadlines for when a bill has to have been through a policy committee, when it has to have been through its House of Origin, and when it has to be signed by the governor, you can track exactly where each bill needs to be in order to meet those deadlines. Of course, that takes it's a very involved process. It's much easier to track the things more or less in real time and get the online updates, certainly for me. But it is how I set my calendar for the year as I'm looking for things. I know thanks to these resources, I have dates in my calendar on Outlook. Here's when I need to check if these bills are out of committee. Here's where I need to check if these bills are out of House of Origin. And I know who to talk to see if they are moving or what it will take to move them because of that. All right, so here is the bill process. I referenced it earlier. You all know the song, I hope, the Schoolhouse Rock. It was mentioned, what you learn in high school or junior high if you went to school in California. It does mirror the congressional process, but something I like to emphasize is that the state legislature, the Assembly and the Senate, abide by a set of rules scheduled around the calendar. Congress just has a limited working session during which they can really do whatever they want. It makes tracking things in the federal process a little bit harder. It's all done ad hoc. Technically, the steps are the same, but you never know at what point anyone's going to decide to hold a hearing for bills that may or may not have been referred to that committee. Certainly, it makes tracking one of our top pieces of legislation that we look at for the OC Food Bank very difficult. The all-important Farm Bill, which authorizes so much of the funding that we rely on, and especially that folks in our community rely on as when for nutritional supplements or supplementary nutrition, excuse me. Hope you all know Bill. Oh, this is where I should mention, since you bill introduction and drafting bill language. Since Lawrence, you mentioned that at the beginning. Is it on the next slide? No. Part of the role of legislative council is that they are the legal entity which represents the California state legislature, both houses, Assembly and Senate. They also handle when you introduce a bill as a staffer, as an assembly person or a senator, you have to submit a bill proposal to legislative council. And legislative council gives you back a bill jacket with the text of the bill inside. And they're the ones who actually handle putting it all into proper legal language in order to make sure that any suggested changes to the California legal code that you are making as part of your bill idea actually impact and reflect the code as written. So it's one thing for a legislative staff person or an elected official to look at the code and say, okay, this is where I want to change these lines. And that's usually how they will introduce a bill. But legislative council are the ones who look at that and then say, all right, this is what they want to change, but how does that impact the California legal code? And they may even come back with it looks like what you want to do is this, but actually the code section that you might have been looking for in the first place or that actually affects what you're talking about is somewhere else. Legislative Council also issues their recommended kind of code changes as part of a cleanup process for the California legal code. It's something they do annually. And one of the easy to pass bills that legislators will introduce is to just adopt whatever recommendations they are making year in and year out. Now, the bill introduction process happens. Obviously, we're in the middle of it right now. Assembly members and senators are still introducing bills. There is a deadline on the legislative calendar. If I had been a little bit more prepared, I'd probably have it for you right now, but I don't want to give anyone the wrong date. I just want to let you know that if you follow the links in the presentation, you can find that bill introduction deadline for this year. In fact, yes, that's a good transition to here. So once a bill has been introduced, and there is a rush at the beginning of the year that happens, Leg Council usually gets backed up with the number of individual requests they have from legislators to have their bills churned out so that they can be introduced and then referred by the Rules Committee to the appropriate subject matter committee. That's your Education Committee, your Health Committee, your Human Services Committee, Housing, Utilities and Energy, Business and Professions, Jobs and Economic Development. And it's good to get in early, not only so that you don't get part of the backup that Legislative Council experiences, but having your bill referred out early to the appropriate committee usually means you'll get to be in at one of the earlier hearings of the committee. The committee chairs decide when they're going to have a hearing. They'll usually decide once they have a certain number of bill referrals. And based on the feedback they get from the consultants for the committee, who work out of the legislative office building, they're nonpartisan. So even if the Democrats are, and consistently Democrats have the majority on all the committees in the Senate and the legislature, probably not going to change anytime soon. Uh, they are nonpartisan, and it is their job to give a nonpartisan bill analysis that is publicly available ahead of the committee. When I was a committee secretary, part of my job was making sure that the consultants were on track for these, um, and telling both the chief consultant and the chair of the committee, okay, based on where everyone's at with researching the bill analyses for the bills referred to the committee thus far, here's when we can anticipate we'll be ready, and giving a date there, which impacts how long it takes to publicly notice the hearing and then what day it's going to be heard. So I'll refer back to the legislative information system in the second slide here. That's where you can access all of the bill analyses. I highly recommend using that as a resource to look at. Interpreting the bill language can be difficult at the best of times, even if you've been doing it for a long time. Whereas the nonpartisan committee analysis, they will go back through and they will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you in the process. Not only will they give you the background, they'll say what the author, intended. They give an author's statement as part of all of them. They'll go back and they'll say, okay, this bill has been introduced in the past with this exact same language, or with new changes, including things that are often amendments suggested by a committee that don't initially get adopted. It's one of the ways for a bill to die. And then once you've got the committee analysis, there's a floor unit for both the Assembly and the Senate who do a similar analysis process. They may come up with new things. It's especially if the bill has amendments attached to it at that point. And amendments are the part that really kind of gums up the works. The easiest way to get amendments to a bill is in committee. Amending a bill on the floor requires a majority vote. It requires that the bill then be re-referred, or that it be voted on without reference to file, which requires a supermajority. Now, the Dems can usually make that happen, but you can bet that the Republicans will have a big stink about anything, that's passed to the floor without reference to file. It's sometimes called wharfed to the floor. And if you like watching the assembly floor sessions, that's usually when things get a little interesting. But sticking to the ideal way that the process occurs. When a bill is referred to the committee, if it's something, say, our organization or a coalition that we're a part of likes, or we wanted to suggest amendments to it, the easiest time is to have them be author's amendments or committee amendments. It allows the bill to pass out of the committee, and the chair will say the amendments will be adopted in as part of this vote. Fastest, smoothest way to have a bill amended, at which point it doesn't have to go back to the floor. It can just be referred to the next committee, or it can go right on to the next house. Or sorry, no, it has to go to the floor and then on to the next house, as opposed to having be re-referred around based on the amendments. And then you have fiscal bills. That's the majority of bills, anything that has a cost attached to it. And these bills are all not only go to a policy committee for the subject matter they deal with, they are then referred also to the appropriate subcommittee for the budget committee. That's budget sub 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which more or less align to the policy committee subject matter, but they will be looking explicitly at the cost of the bill. And those all get reheard at the same time at the suspense hearing, which happens shortly before the deadline for all fiscal bills to be done. They do that at the last moment. It's oftentimes said that's where bills go to die because the budget committee will just say, well, this bill costs a lot of money and we don't have it. The Department of Finance for the California government says this bill costs a lot of money and we don't have it. And then we have budget asks. Actually, before I move on from that, does anyone have any questions?
Matthew, I didn't have a question as much as a comment. I kind of put it in the chat, but I was saying, that was really probably a very huge learning curve for me to understand that, just because a bill had passed didn't mean that it would make it through. And it was a little bit shocking, to learn that you could do a mass amount of work to get a bill in, go through both floors, and then, get into the budget and just get completely, erased, like it never even happened. And I think that's a little bit of almost a very small control over a lot of things through that process. And it's very, very interesting that, again, we've had some things in the past that we've pushed forward and felt really confident about, and then just to see it, be gone in over a couple day period is always a little bit shocking.
Probably the hardest part about that, and a specific example comes to mind with regards to vaccines. This was a bill we looked at even prior to the pandemic, and it was simply about getting more children vaccinated. And Department of Finance and the Fiscal Committee said, no, costs too much money. And you want to push back on that and say it's like, yes, but there's a cost benefits analysis because it will save money in the long run. They don't do that. That may change with the new budget chair. I'm not terribly hopeful. But the LAO and the Department of Finance, they are the Legislative Analyst's Office. It's the nonpartisan office that offers their own analysis of not only the budget but the fiscal outlook for legislation. They don't do a cost benefits analysis. They do a cost analysis, and big high cost means you're less likely to get out through the fiscal committee no matter what. It's not easy. Even as David said, when you have your bill specifically outlined in the budget bill, which is what we'll talk about next. One note, something that has changed recently is it used to be that there was more consideration given, for an offset. A bill that costs money might be an author might try to work in a different code change, or you want to talk about political suicide, a tax or a fee. Those used to be ways to try and offset the fiscal cost of the bill. Those don't happen a lot anymore. I can't speak a lot into what the thinking is there, but we've gotten pushback specifically just in these most recent years when we were asking for money for the state-funded diaper bank network. CapOC operates the OC Diaper Bank, and one suggestion we had for a budget champion, move forward to the slide with this, for a budget champion was, hey, what if we, decided there's some money here if we eliminated this? And the pushback we got, not only from them, but from our Sacramento lobbying firm, who we hired, was they don't really do that anymore. It's seen to kind of gum up the works and be more the provision of the budget committees themselves to make that determination if there's a way to raise money. Try to bite my tongue there about what I think would be some best practices, because unfortunately, the governor doesn't take my calls anymore. Can you believe it? At any rate, budget asks. These are not like bills. Um, a bill will have a cost associated with it. Your budget ask is something that occupies a kind of nebulous middle ground in the process. It's essentially just a line of text you want included in the budget bill, which the assembly passes as their kind of response to the governor's proposed budget. So the ideal situation, which we've never managed for the diaper bank, it's on my mind because we run out of funding this year, is for the governor to say, okay, I want funding for this. I'm including it as part of my governor's budget, which has to be published before January 10th under the Constitution of California. And then the legislature will respond with their own version of what they think the budget should look like. And there's a negotiation process that happens between both branches of the California state government there. So if you're looking to fund a program, or if you're looking to get funding for a bill that costs money, you have to kind of do both. Or sorry, no, if you have a bill that costs money, you kind of have to do both. You have to get it through the bill introduction process, and you have to get it referred to one of the fiscal committees, and then it goes to suspense for the big suspense file hearing, which happens right before the fiscal deadline every year. And the best way to handle that is to make sure that there's a line in the budget bill that says, also, we're going to pay for the money that this bill costs. It's not easy. I'll use as an example our diaper bank funding, which didn't require a bill. It simply required us to find both an assembly person and a senator who were willing to say, as budget negotiations were ongoing, hey, we really think, there should be funding for diapers. We had to get that in print from them, had to email and call and get them to, and then draft a letter for them that they then signed and submitted to the budget committees. Yes, David.
And I was going to say that's the format we've taken this year with CSBG protection. So, it's a budget ask. Senator Hurtado is taking it on. Is writing the letter. And one of the things that's been unique this year, if you saw that, is that they're asking for senators on the Senate side to get together and decide kind of as a group what their budget asks are going to be versus everyone putting those in individual. So with ours, yes, Senator Hurtado is leading. We're hoping we'll lead that effort, but it's getting multiple other senators to sign on as well for that letter, that official signed letter to go to the speaker for that format. So that'll be a part of this legislative day coming up, is mentioning that's going to be important for us to continue our work. So.
See, I thought that might be exactly what you were going to mention, because this process, unlike everything I outlined with the bills or from introduction to committee, is informal. It is the Speaker's office who says to the legislatures, okay, here's how budget asks are going to happen. Here's how we'll entertain them. Here's how you should submit them to the budget committee, who will then evaluate them and what place they will have, if any, in the budget bill. So this all is run out of the Speaker's office. And I think this is an important other point to make about how the legislature itself operates. We have a relatively new Speaker, and a lot has changed from how things were done in the past with regards to bill introduction, budget asks, and it's the Speaker's prerogative to change their mind at any time. But California's leadership is highly centralized out of the Speaker's office. Most assemblies, persons, and senators have a small staff. The Speaker's office has a dedicated staff in addition to the personal staffers that they have. They have their own budget analysts. They have their own consultants. And and the speaker likes to appear not simply, or rather, or they like to appear nonpartisan or not playing favorites, uh, particularly with regard to their own introduced legislation and their own budget asks. But that's kind of um, I like to emphasize that framing so that as small as the California legislature is in terms of just the number of members, it still has a centralized leadership structure out of the speaker's office. And they're the one who ultimately make the rules. So the budget bill itself, uh, that does have to obey the rules in terms of public notice, in terms of it being in print. If you can get a copy in print, that's part of how you make sure that what your budget ask may be um, will be funded. And you don't know. And the really hard part is that there can be last minute amendments, and we've had it be the case where funding for something that was written into the budget bill as it was drafted and moved from the floor was then cut out um, as it was negotiated between both houses. There's a push and pull. The Assembly will have their version of the bill, the Senate will have their version of the bill, and they will refuse to release them to one another so that they can vote on them until they've done their own negotiations. That's the part where um, I'll emphasize is kind of as close as you get to the backroom deals and trading favors is when the houses themselves and the assembly persons are getting together to try and negotiate, as David mentioned just a moment ago. Okay, what can we really put on a list together that we can all agree on? All right. So our role in this. I wrote this specifically with CAPOC in mind. But I like to hope that these are best practices which any nonprofit can use, any advocacy organization can use with regard to the clients, the people they serve. And this is perhaps personal, but I like to think that lobbying is not a dirty word. Um, we are not a special interest. That's the other, term that I remember growing up and working, for a long time. But it really is a shackle to have to try and frame everything in terms of, well, we just want to educate elected officials about these issues. Is no, you can show passion to them, and you can demonstrate that that the work we do has genuine impacts on people's lives. That's something very powerful, because the elected officials are themselves isolated. They're often conscious of it. They don't say it out loud unless they're trying to, make a joke about it or show some self-deprecation. They often don't see how their policies, how the bills they get voted on impact real people's lives, and they are desperate for any instances and examples of that they can use to validate their work and validate it to their constituents, not just in a campaign perspective, but emphasizing it to their fellow legislators, to the Speaker's office, and back to their party. So one of the things we bring to it as CAPOC, kind of the foundation we stand on, is that we are doing work that people in the community, our clients, the people we are helping, thanks to state funding, federal funding, to changes to regulation, they don't have the time and opportunity to do what we do. And that's an important role. It's something that our organization is able to accomplish only because we have resources that go beyond what even if you just had as many people as are employed by CAPOC getting together in a room. And the bread and butter of that is as many lines of communication as you can keep with legislators as possible. For me, I emphasize the importance of letters. A letter writing campaign I can tell you, I've also having done some organizing and some campaign work in the past. Uh, Usually, all a legislator will care about is volume. Um, written words are easy to ignore. I know as a legislative staffer, I had a bin that I put, letters and leave behind materials in, and it wasn't we're going to throw this out. It's I'm going to look at that and consider it later. Uh, but something I always paid attention to as a staffer, and something that I know that staffers pay attention to, are the names that get listed as part of letters of support and opposition on those bill analyses. That's something you take to your ledge director. That's something you take to your chief of staff when you say, okay, are we voting for this? Are we not voting for this? We have, organizations that were in support. We have organizations that are opposed. And the committee analyses will reflect concerns raised in a letter of support or in a letter of opposition. I know that there's kind of a best practice in the nonprofit community to not focus on letters of opposition unless it's something truly egregious. Focus on the positive. I think that's an important framing, especially in the divided partisan atmosphere. You will get folks who just turn off immediately if they hear you being critical of something, no matter how rightfully or even righteously. And that's a certain amount of subversive framing, which is useful even when it comes to policy, if you can subvert the politics of a specific thing. I think I've just bypassed my own slide, but I'll try and finish that thought. I've had some success, for example, advocating in DC with Republicans adamantly opposed to the social safety net by emphasizing to them that actually, if there's fewer people using their SNAP benefits in your district, that's tens of millions of lost economic opportunity. It pains my soul not to emphasize that that's more people going hungry, but framing it to them that way was effective in getting several key votes to just say, actually, maybe we don't have to cut SNAP this year. We're going through that fight again right now, but it's something that continues to be useful. Is you can take a positive framing, a constructive framing, and convey that passion for the cause in a way which is going to resonate with whatever issues they might align with. And that's especially, I've got the transition now. That's especially important to take into meetings with legislators, scheduling them in person, meetings with staff. Developing relationships with staff is an important part of the process. Just because you didn't get a chance to talk to the legislator themselves, it's not a loss. Something I do in my position is try to emphasize that I'm working through the same hierarchy that the offices have. Ideally, I get our CEO, Mr. Scott, to interact with the legislator directly, and then I get to talk to the staff person who made that connection, who brought the issue up to them. That's a great way to kind of build a more interactive relationship with a political office. And then finally, coalition efforts. CAPOC doesn't just sign on to a letter. That is a great point by David Knight. This is something I'll do a quick aside about if we have time. I don't know if it was scheduled for an hour, but I see we're coming up at 3 o'clock.
You're okay. We started a little late, so if you need to, we want to keep going, and because I know you got some good ones to end on here.
This one is a key reference for the California State Legislature. This is the kind of quarterly calendar I build my year around. Um, I look at the bills from the odd numbered year. If it's the second year of a legislative cycle, we're entering the first one right now. Anything that's not out of its bill of origin past this point, that bill's dead. You look at spring resets, which is coming up. And that's going to be the time when the legislators are going to be in district. It's a great time to talk to them about how things have happened so far, bills that have been introduced. Thank you, James. And then April to June, you have the non-fiscal bill hearing deadline, the House of Origin deadline. That's when those odd numbered bills die. And then you have the longer recess, the summer recess. Summer recess, there's only so much you can do because that's after the budget bill deadline. That's going to be after that date that the budget bill itself is passed, so you know what's being funded and what's not. It takes a monumental effort to try and amend that bill after the process, after that deadline. But it is the time to talk about what you can look forward to in August, which is the fiscal bill deadline. That's when the appropriations hearing happens. It's a slog. There's very few things to do about it except to watch it and try and have the bills ready and wait for them to see what they get voted on. They often use a slate system, A roll call, B roll call, C roll call. A roll call being everyone votes yes, B roll call being all the Democrats vote yes and all the Republicans vote no, and C roll call being all the Democrats vote yes and the Republicans abstain. Otherwise, they might actually call for a vote if it's particularly contentious, but that usually gets sorted out ahead of time. And then finally, fall and winter, you have the governor's signature, and you can start looking forward to the next year. That's the end of my slides, but I want to go back real quick. No, I want to open it up for questions at this time.
I don't have a question, but just thank you. That was a lot of really great information and helpful for me to understand a little bit more how it works. Kind of like Linda had mentioned earlier, I didn't realize some of the little nitpicky things, so hearing about them is definitely helpful.
I'm glad, and I mean, if there was anything I was going to add, I would add, it's that as much as I try to be a resource for everyone else who's going through this um, with the process itself, you can ask these questions of the legislature themselves. Staffers are obliged to let you know when the deadlines are, what they are working on. Um, one thing I do whenever there's a piece of information that's interested is you should always request a fact sheet from the author's office. Uh, and then what I will do is I have my file that I collect all my fact sheets and I turn them over and I write on the back of them, what was the last time I communicated about this? When was the last time I talked to anyone about this? Who's the new staff person in charge of it? That's makes it easier on me. I find folks develop their own ways to go through it. The committee consultants as well. Technically, they answer to the elected officials, not us. But most of the committee consultants, because they don't get a lot of phone calls compared to a staffer's office, you can get a lot done by going directly to them, talking to them about a bill if you're able to. we had a lot of meetings that our chief consultant took when I was working for the Jobs Committee with stakeholders from the California Manufacturing Technology Association, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Building and Trades Commission. It was a great opportunity for them to talk about a bill that they were taking positions on and to hear from the consultant for the committee who was writing the analysis. Where do they think this bill is at? And what do they see the impacts as? Trust me, if I was in Sacramento, I would be spending a lot more time at the legislative office building, going between the offices, talking to the consultant. It's like, oh, hey, it's me again. Um, but that's I don't have it in these slides, but I think I'm going to make a point of including that from now on. Talking to the author's offices is great. Developing relationships with committee staff and with the with the legislative analyst's office are also great resources as well. You have to remember they're nonpartisan. You can't say on behalf of constituents, but you can engage them in their expertise. Anyone else?
I just really appreciate you, sorry. I just really appreciate you encouraging us to ask questions because one of the things that was talked about on the ELA committee was kind of how intimidating it is for people who are new to this. Granted, they are meeting with sometimes the elected official themselves, and I can imagine that that would be very intimidating. But just calling, asking questions, asking for a fact sheet, I think someone like me who's enough steps disconnected, I assume that I have to go in knowing what I need to know, or I'm not allowed to reach out to them if I don't already know what I'm talking about. So um, I appreciate being encouraged to ask questions.
Truly, as someone who's worked on the process from both sides now, I try to emphasize to everyone, it's not rocket science. It's not even stage magic. The folks working on the staff, in the committees and for the speaker's office, they have a great deal of institutional knowledge, but they're not gaming it. Um, Most of them don't have the time to try and game out every single thing that they are going to be managing in terms of a legislator's um, asks of them and what their agenda is going to be for the year. And the legislators themselves, they can't keep track of everything. There's just too much. So keeping it in terms of trying to make yourself a resource for them can be a very helpful approach to it. Once you've got a couple of fact sheets, you can use those to model the fact sheet for your own budget asks, your own bills. Once you've seen a letter that they write for something in support of what your budget ask or your bill might be, save that as the template for your asks going forward and say, oh, if you do want to sign on to our letter, we just happen to have a letter already ready. We have a draft that, you just have to put on your letterhead. Hell, you can go into the committee bill analyses and find them right now for previous year's legislation. It's all there. Thank you, Linda. So, David, Lawrence, I believe you have a copy. I can forward this again. I might even update a couple of things. Try to make it as cycle neutral as I can because I'm expecting changes going forward with the speaker's office. David noted one of them. But the links work, or they did the last time I checked. And I recommend using this presentation as I really intended it to be a primer. You can refer back to it, and you can click the links and try and use it as your basis as you develop your legislative and advocacy process.
Think this would be great to go into your what was it you brought up today, David, that you just got refunded to continue your it's a kind of a advanced training program for newbies. But I wanted to say, Matthew, that I really appreciate your comment on lobbying and advocacy and the restriction being focused on elections and not policy. I think that's a real misnomer that we have out there. And, I've been uptight all my life in this business because I didn't want to, be misconstrued as lobbying for something and breaking the law. So I think that for me, that's the most important takeaway is we should be and can be doing this without, having to worry about breaking the law and doing something incorrectly and losing our grants. So thank you. Very, very informative. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually drafted best practices for the Community Action Partnership to try and make that distinction when dealing with elected officials here. I can talk to my supervisor about something more publicly available, and to David and Lawrence, but that it is an important thing to note. And you can always talk about a policy issue outside of the context of an election. You never have to bring up an election, and that's a pretty safe way to talk about any issue.
Nice.
Either that or CMTA and Silicon Valley Leadership Group have been doing it all wrong.
So Matthew, can we contact you if we have any specific questions or whatever?
Yes,
And how do we do that?
include my email here in the chat.
Thank you. I'm just jealous that you guys have the funds to be able to support your position. I think that's awesome. We're really small, so that would be a challenge for us. But so we rely on Cal Kappa and our Energy Association Access to kind of take the lead on this stuff for us. But wow, how great it would be, and what a cool job.
Yeah, I like doing it. I'll admit it's thanks to the director of the food bank here, Mark Lowry, who was the chief advocate for the Community Action Partnership for many years. Always emphasized that lobbying took up about 5% of his time, but had some of the biggest returns on the time he spent doing it, and managed to convince one of our major donors that they should sponsor a position within the organization, which became mine.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's a final plug. This is a personal one. David mentioned that the staffers often have more experience than the legislators themselves. It's a good thing to note. If I were to get rehired by the legislator tomorrow, my 7 years of experience would put me in the top 25th percentile of elected officials between this assembly and the Senate,
Well,
which is to say I would have more legislative experience than 75% of any California legislature.
wow.
Lobbyists tend to have even more, precisely because California has term limits. I don't like term limits. I'll make that clear here. That's personal aside, but I think they empower lobbyists in a way which is not to everyone's advantage, certainly not to the general public.
I totally agree with you.
But with that said, thank you all very much for listening, for your comments and questions. Feel free to email me. Uh, I'll be working with Cal Kappa as much as I can, and as part of other coalitions. Even if you're looking for a referral to coalitions throughout California, CapOC works with the Association of Food Banks, Utilities and Power. We have an energy and utilities division. Um, a couple of other poverty amelioration statewide groups, National Diaper Bank Network. They're all great resources as well, and will help you, as you said, Linda, fill the gaps that a small organization doesn't always have the chance to fulfill. I'm going to jump off now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Glad to be here.